What if the men who never break are not stronger than you? What if they simply built something you have never been taught to build? Not toughness, not willpower, not discipline, architecture. 7 principles. The internal structure that makes pressure irrelevant. Most men spend their whole life building tolerance. The unbreakable ones built something else entirely. You have seen it. A man who handles pressure that would break most people. Not performing calm. Actually calm. A negotiation collapses. He does not flinch. Unexpected news arrives. He processes it and moves. Someone tries to destabilize him in a room full of people. Nothing lands. You have also seen the other kind. The man who looks solid until the pressure arrives, and then something you did not expect happens. He panics. He freezes. He makes decisions he regrets. Or he holds it together externally and completely falls apart internally, where nobody can see it, but he can feel it. Most men are the second kind and they do not know it. They think they are the first kind because they have not been tested at the level that reveals the truth. Here is the distinction almost no one makes. Tolerance is the ability to endure. You white-knuckle through it. You suppress it. You move past it. And then the next pressure arrives and you start from zero. Every time. Resilience is structural. It is a specific internal architecture that does not endure pressure. It processes it and comes out the other side without the damage accumulating. These are 2 completely different things, and you can only build the second one if you know what it is made of. 7 components. Starting now. Principle 1. The perception layer. You lost a client last year, or a deal fell through, or someone you trusted made a move that cost you. Here is the question nobody asks. How long did that live in your head? Not the event, the interpretation of the event. Here is what that actually looks like. You are 3 months past the moment. The project failed. The partnership ended. Whatever it was. On paper, you have moved on. You are working on new things. Talking to new people, but at 2 in the morning something pulls you back. He should not have done that. I trusted him. I gave him everything I had on that project, or I should have seen it. The signs were there. Why did I miss them? The event is over. The story is still running. And every time the story runs, the damage runs with it. Fresh cortisol. Fresh activation, fresh wound, not from what happened, from the interpretation you keep returning to. Most men keep the wound open by returning to the story. The event ended. The story keeps running, and the story is where the damage actually happens. Marcus Aurelius wrote something in his personal journal that was never meant to be published. He wrote it to remind himself while commanding an empire during a plague that killed 5 million people, while managing generals who wanted his position, while making decisions where being wrong meant thousands died. He wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." He was not writing philosophy. He was writing an operating manual for surviving conditions that would break most people. He returned to that line constantly, because the pressure was constant, and the only variable he could actually control was how he processed what hit him. The neuroscience explains why. Dr. Ulrike Basten at Goethe University. Frankfurt published research in the Journal of Neuroscience in 2026. Her team found that resilient individuals do not experience fewer negative events. They process them differently at the neurological level. Specifically, the prefrontal cortex in resilient people shows stronger responses to negative information. Not weaker, stronger. They engage more completely with the loss, with the failure, with the bad outcome. That fuller engagement is what allows them to process it and release it. The men who suppress it are the ones who carry it forward. The men who engage with it fully are the ones who can let it go. Here is what this looks like applied. When something goes wrong, do not immediately move on. Name it exactly. This cost me a significant partnership. This cost me a relationship I valued. This was a failure. Complete contact with the event. Then ask one question. What in this situation was inside my control? What was not? Write 2 columns if you have to. Everything outside your control gets released. Completely. Not managed. Released. Everything inside it becomes information. Not self-punishment. Information. What do I do differently next time? This is the perception layer. Without it, everything you build on top of it is unstable. Because the foundation shifts every time something goes wrong. You cannot build on a surface that moves. And the men who have the perception layer in place are not carrying what the next principle is about to describe. Principle 2. The clearance mechanism. Think about 2 men who both lose the same deal. Same stakes, same outcome, same initial pain. The first man does not process it. He tells himself he is fine. He moved to the next thing. 6 months later, he is in a new negotiation. The other side makes a move that reminds him, not consciously, but just enough, of what happened last time. Something tightens. His read of the room shifts slightly. He makes a decision based on a situation that is not actually there. He is reacting to the last deal, not the current one. He does not know it. The residue is invisible to him, but it is running every decision he makes in that room. The second man sits with what happened, not to feel bad about it, to close the file. He writes what happened, what he felt, what was in his control, what he learned. The brain builds its narrative. The event gets filed. 6 months later, he walks into the new negotiation clean. No residue, no invisible weight shifting his reads. He sees the room as it actually is. Same loss. Completely different trajectory 12 months later. That is the clearance mechanism. Think about the men you know who carry things. The grudge from 5 years ago. The deal that did not close. The person who moved against them. They reference it. They replay it. They let it contaminate decisions that have nothing to do with it. Then look at the men who do not. They move clean. Every situation assessed on its actual merits. No residue from the last one bleeding into the current one. That is not natural forgiveness. That is a specific skill. And it has a mechanism. James Pennebaker at the University of Texas has studied emotional processing for 4 decades. His findings are consistent and significant. People who write about difficult experiences in detail, what happened and what they felt, show measurable physiological improvement. Lower cortisol, better immune function, improved cognitive performance. Not because writing is therapeutic in some general sense, because the act of constructing a coherent narrative about a difficult event completes the processing cycle. The brain needs a story with a beginning, a middle, and an end. When it has that, it can file the event and stop returning to it. When it doesn't have that, the event stays active, and active events consume processing power constantly. Here is the dark side most men never think about. Every unprocessed event you are carrying is consuming cognitive resources right now. Not consciously, unconsciously. Your working memory, your decision-making capacity, your emotional regulation are all degraded by the weight of what has not been processed. You are not operating at your actual capacity. You are operating at your capacity minus the accumulated load. In 2026, with AI disruption and market shifts happening in weeks, not years, the load accumulates faster than ever. The men who can clear it will compound their advantages. The men who cannot will hit a ceiling and not understand why. The practice is specific. Once a week, 15 minutes. Write about one unresolved event. What happened? What you felt. Then write what was in your control and what was not. Then write one thing you learned. Then stop. You are not processing your emotions. You are building the narrative your brain needs to close the file. What you carry gets heavier. What you process becomes data. And what comes after this principle is where most men stop entirely. Because it asks something most men are not willing to do. Principle 3. The anti-fragility trigger. Picture this. It is early 2023. A man runs a mid-size marketing agency. AI tools start replacing the services his team has been delivering for years. Copywriting, design briefs, research, analytics summaries, all of it suddenly available for a fraction of what he charges. His two biggest clients cut their contracts. Revenue drops 40% in 4 months. The men in his position who treated this as a threat spent the next year defending the old model, justifying why humans do it better, competing on price, burning through runway. Most of them are gone now or running significantly smaller operations. He did something different. He asked one question. What does this make possible that was not possible before? The answer, his clients now had more content than they could use strategically, more output than they had infrastructure to deploy. They did not need someone to produce content anymore. They needed someone to build the system that made the content work. He rebuilt his entire operation around that. Revenue recovered in 8 months, doubled within 2 years. Same pressure, completely different calculation. That is the anti-fragility trigger. Here is the distinction most men have never made. Resilience means you recover from pressure. Anti-fragility means you are stronger because of it. Those are not the same thing. Most men think anti-fragility means optimism. Positive reframing. Finding the silver lining. That is not it. Anti-fragility is the systematic extraction of advantage from things that damage other people. Every adverse event contains a structural advantage for someone. Most men are so focused on managing the damage that they never identify the advantage. The anti-fragile man runs both calculations simultaneously. What is this costing me? And what is this giving me that was not available before? Epictetus understood this before anyone named it. He was born a slave. He became the most influential philosopher of his era. His philosophy was forged under conditions that would destroy most people. He said the obstacle is not separate from the path. The obstacle is the path. Every constraint he operated under forced him to develop capacities he would never have built in comfort. Here is what this looks like right now in 2026. AI is eliminating entire categories of work. The men treating that as a threat are spending their energy on resistance. The men treating it as an anti-fragility trigger are asking a different question. What does this make possible that was not possible before? What capacity does this require me to build that will make me significantly more valuable? What does this clear out of my time that I was doing out of habit rather than strategy? The dark side of missing this. Every pressure you experience without extracting the advantage is just damage, and damage accumulates. The men who do not run the second calculation are getting weaker from the same events that are making other men stronger. Resistance atrophies. engagement strengthens. The question is, which response you are training right now? And the next principle is the one most men skip because it feels like they already have it. They do not. Principle 4, the anchor system. Most men have no idea what they actually value. They think they do. Ask them and they will give you an answer. Family, success, integrity, freedom. But here is the test that reveals the truth. You are in a negotiation. The other side makes an offer that would solve your immediate problem. But accepting it means compromising something you said you would not compromise. Not dramatically, just slightly. Just enough that you could tell yourself it is still within range. What do? Most men take the offer, and then they tell themselves a story about why it was actually fine. That the value was never that firm, that the situation was exceptional, that a reasonable person would have done the same. And perhaps they are right, perhaps it was fine, but do that enough times under enough pressure and the anchors are gone. Not because you abandoned them dramatically, because they eroded one reasonable exception at a time. And when the pressure arrives that actually requires something solid to hold on to, there is nothing left. This is why the anchor system is not about identifying your values. It is about testing them under load before the moment requires them. Ryan and Desai at the University of Rochester have studied self-determination for decades. Their research distinguishes between two types of motivation. Introjected motivation, doing things because you have absorbed an external standard you feel you should meet. And identified motivation, doing things because they genuinely align with what you actually are. The first type creates chronic low-level stress, even when you are succeeding by that standard, because somewhere underneath, you know it is not yours. The second type creates a stable internal reference point. You can be wrong, you can fail, you can be attacked, and none of it destabilizes the core because the core is not located in the outcome. The men who hold pressure without breaking know exactly what they stand on, not what they aspire to, what they actually stand on, and they have tested it. They have made decisions that cost them something real specifically to find out if the value holds under load. Marcus Aurelius tested this constantly. He would deliberately choose the harder option when both were available, not because it was more efficient, because it confirmed the architecture was real. He wrote about this repeatedly in Meditations. The man who has never tested his values under real conditions does not know what he actually has. He knows what he believes he has. Those are not the same thing. The practice. Write 3 things you say you value. Then write the most recent decision where each one was tested. Did your behavior confirm the value or contradict it? This is not a guilt exercise. It is a calibration exercise. You are finding out what your actual anchors are. Because you can only build on what is real. And you can only rely on what you have already tested. Without real anchors, every pressure moves you. With them, pressure has nowhere to grip. If pressure has ever moved you in a direction you did not choose, subscribe to Dark Architect. This is exactly the architecture we break down every week. The button is right there. Principle 5. The voluntary discomfort protocol. Here is something the Stoics practiced that looks irrational until you understand the mechanism. They deliberately made themselves uncomfortable, not as punishment, as training. Seneca wrote about this specifically. He would periodically eat the food of the poor, wear coarse clothing, sleep on a hard surface. Not because he could not afford otherwise, because he wanted to know experientially, not theoretically, that he could handle it. He wrote to a friend, Set aside certain days on which you will be content with the cheapest and scantiest food. Do this so that when life requires it of you, you will not be caught unprepared. That is not asceticism. That is deliberate inoculation. The neuroscience confirms the mechanism. When the brain encounters a stressor repeatedly in controlled conditions, it recalibrates its threat response. What was initially coded as dangerous becomes familiar, and familiarity reduces the fear response significantly. This is the basis of exposure therapy, of military stress inoculation training, of every high-performance environment that systematically exposes people to controlled pressure before the real pressure arrives. Here is why this matters more in 2026 than it ever has before. The modern environment is the most comfort-optimized system in human history, and it is getting more optimized every month. Every app, every platform, every service is now running AI systems specifically designed to eliminate friction, to predict what you want before you ask for it, to remove every moment of uncertainty, waiting, or discomfort from your experience. That sounds like progress. Here is what it actually is. It is the systematic removal of every low-level stressor your nervous system uses to calibrate itself. And the result is a generation of men whose nervous systems have never been calibrated against anything real, who treat minor discomfort as emergency, who cannot sit with uncertainty for 4 minutes without reaching for a phone, who make reactive decisions under any pressure because their system has no reference point for what real pressure feels like. You are living inside a machine that is making you softer every day. Most men do not know it. The ones who do are deliberately running against it. The men who operate at the highest levels understand this. They do not seek comfort. They seek calibration. They know that a nervous system that has never experienced real discomfort under controlled conditions will not hold when the discomfort arrives without permission. The protocol is simple. 1 thing per week that you are avoiding because it is uncomfortable. Not because it is harmful, because it requires something from you. A difficult conversation you have been delaying. Physical discomfort that has no practical payoff. A situation where you have to operate in uncertainty without resolving it immediately. Cold, hunger, silence, rejection, whatever your system treats as threat. Put yourself in it deliberately. Stay in it longer than feels necessary. The goal is not toughness. The goal is accurate calibration. You want to know exactly where your edges actually are. Because the men who do not know where their edges are always find out at the worst possible moment. And the next principle is about what happens in that worst possible moment. The fraction of a second that determines everything. Principle 6, the compression response. There is a specific moment that determines everything, the moment between what happens and what you do. Here is what that moment looks like when it goes wrong. You're in a meeting. A colleague challenges your work in front of the room. Not privately, in front of everyone whose opinion you value. The challenge is unfair. You know it. Part of you knows they know it too. In the fraction of a second after it lands, something fires. Your jaw tightens. Heat moves into your face, and before you have decided anything, you are already responding. Your voice has an edge it did not have 3 seconds ago. You are defending instead of thinking. And you have given the room something they were not supposed to see. Not because you are weak, because the gap closed before you could use it. That is compression, and for most men in 2026, operating in near constant information, overload, and social pressure, that gap has almost completely closed. Viktor Frankl documented what happens when men maintain that gap under conditions most people cannot imagine. He documented it from inside a Nazi concentration camp. The conditions he described were not metaphorical. He was watching men die. Men who had held on longer than anyone expected and then broke. Not because the conditions worsened, but because they lost access to this specific moment. He wrote that between stimulus and response there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. Most men have no access to that space. The stimulus arrives and the response fires automatically. Someone challenges them and they react before they have decided to. News arrives that threatens something they care about, and they make a decision before they have processed. A confrontation starts, and they are already in it before they had a chance to choose. The good news is the space is trainable. Dr. John Kabat-Zinn at the University of Massachusetts has studied attention regulation for 4 decades. The research is replicated thousands of times across clinical and performance contexts. The ability to insert a deliberate gap between stimulus and response is a trainable skill, not a personality trait, not a gift, a skill. And the men who develop it operate in a different category. They have a choice where other men have only an automatic response. Back to the meeting. Same challenge from the colleague. Same unfair public attack. Same heat arriving in the chest. The man who has trained this gap feels all of it. He is not calmer. He is not less activated. But in the fraction of a second before he responds, he has a choice. He takes one breath, not visibly, not theatrically. One breath that creates just enough space for a decision to exist, and he responds from that decision instead of from the activation. The room sees something completely different from what they saw in the first version. And so does he. The dark psychology angle. The systems designed to influence your behavior know this space exists. Every notification engineered to produce immediate response. Every headline designed to trigger emotion before cognition engages. Every social dynamic that creates pressure for an instant answer. All of it designed to eliminate the space where your actual judgment lives. The man who has trained that gap is significantly harder to manipulate because he cannot be caught before he decides. Training it starts with one breath, not visible, not theatrical. One breath before responding to anything that activates you. The gap opens gradually. And in that gap is the difference between who you want to be and who the pressure makes you. Principle 7. The long game orientation. Here is something the most unbreakable men have that most people never identify as the source. They are not trying to win today. They are trying to be a particular kind of man over the course of a life. That sounds abstract until you see what it does to the math of every situation. When you are playing the long game, a short-term loss does not destabilize you. Because a short-term loss in a long game is just information. It tells you something about the territory, and you're going to need that information for where you are going. When you are playing only the short game, every loss is potentially final. Every setback threatens the whole structure. Because the whole structure is built around what is happening right now. Theodore Roosevelt had every reason to be destroyed by his circumstances. His first wife and his mother both died on the same day. February 14th, 1884. He left politics, went to the Dakota Territory, worked cattle, lost most of his herd to one of the worst winters in North American history. Most men who experience one of those things do not come back. He came back from all of them, became one of the most consequential figures in American history. He wrote about that period in his autobiography, not as tragedy, as material. He wrote that he would not have been able to do what he later did without what he went through in Dakota. He was not performing resilience. He had a time horizon long enough to contain the loss. The loss was real. The frame was bigger than the loss. You have seen this in more recent history too. The founders who were forced out of their own companies, who went quiet for a few years, who came back building something that made the first company look like a draft. Not because they were lucky, because they were playing a game that was longer than the setback. Every man who broke them in the short term became irrelevant in the long one. Philip Zimbardo at Stanford studied time perspective for decades. His finding is direct. Future-oriented individuals, people whose primary orientation is toward what they are building over time rather than what they are experiencing right now, show significantly higher resilience under immediate pressure. Not because the pressure is less real, because the pressure is smaller relative to the frame it is sitting in. Here is what this looks like practically. When something significant goes wrong, ask one question before you ask anything else. In 5 years, is this a permanent loss or a chapter in a longer story? Not optimistically. Realistically. Most things that feel permanent in the moment are chapters, and chapters, even painful ones, do not end the story. The dark side. The men around you who operate only in the short game will consistently pressure you toward short game decisions. They will interpret your long game orientation as passivity, as not caring enough, as missing what is happening. They are not wrong about the short game. They are just playing a different game than you are. Hold the frame anyway, because 5 years from now, one of you will have a story and one of you will have a reaction. And the men still standing at that point are almost always the ones who knew which game they were playing. Here is what changes when this architecture is in place. You walk into the room where everything is going wrong. The pressure is real. The stakes are real. And you are the only person in that room who is not being moved by it. Not because you do not feel it. Because you have built something the pressure cannot reach. That is not a personality type. That is not a gift. That is what happens when a man has done the work these 7 principles describe. When he has processed what he has been carrying instead of tolerating it. When he knows what he actually stands on instead of what he says he stands on. When he has trained the gap between stimulus and response until the gap is his. When he runs both calculations simultaneously and extracts the advantage from what damaged everyone else. When the loss is real, but the frame is bigger than the loss. Most men will spend the rest of their lives reacting to pressure, getting through it, surviving it, starting from zero every time the next one arrives. You now have the blueprint for something different. The architecture that does not react. The architecture that processes. The architecture that holds. Start with one principle this week. Just one. The perception layer. The next time something goes wrong, stop before you move past it. Name it exactly. Separate what you controlled from what you did not. Complete contact. Then release. Build one component at a time. Because the men who are actually unbreakable did not arrive there. They built there. And the building starts with the next moment something tries to move you. The next video is already loaded. It covers the psychology of persuasion, how the most influential men get what they want without pressure, without manipulation, and without ever asking directly. Watch it now. Subscribe to Dark Architect. Every week we break down the exact mechanics behind how power, resilience, and human behavior actually operate. No motivation, no fluff. Just the architecture. Stone does not break because it was born harder. Stone does not break because of what it is made of. Stone does not break because of what it has been through.